have to watch a clock. I don't even have to watch a clock. I don't even have to watch a clock.
Hello, hello. Thank you so much for listening to the Bold Moves podcast. I am the host, Mandy Bryce, and this is episode number 351. Today, I am sharing my chat with Kerrian Fournier, who has made some extremely bold moves from jobs that she wasn't necessarily qualified for, becoming extremely successful in them, and then leaving them to follow her heart after a different career path multiple times. I think you're going to love her story, and I'm super excited to share it. So without further ado, here is episode 351 with Kerrian Fournier. Hello, everyone. Today I am chatting with Kerrian Fournier. Welcome to the show, Kerrian.
Hi, my pleasure.
I'm so excited to have you on. Of course, you know that the show is called Bold Moves, and if you hadn't made some at some point, you wouldn't be chatting with me. I would love to give you the opportunity to share a little bit about who you are, your story, and some of the risks that you've taken along the way.
Sure. Thank you so much. So, this is the essence of my career, to be honest, even my personal life story. I joke I have the most serpentine career path on the planet. And anytime there's like somebody in high school or even college stressing about their major, I say, yeah, don't worry about it. Please do not worry about it. So I was a classical theater major at Northwestern many years ago.
Okay.
But I was a theater major that actually took physics and calculus just because I was curious.
Sure.
I had this hypothesis that if you're going to act, you have to understand and know how other people think. And it lucked out, it served me well, because when I got into the arts, I actually love the art form. I didn't love the lifestyle. And, it's something people need to think about jobs, regardless how passionate you are about it. You have to love the lifestyle that came with it. Right. And I quickly realized I liked sequential success. I probably wasn't gypsy enough to always be on the road. And so I went searching for, I had an interim marketing assistant job that just, paid the rent. And I was really looking for my first foothold into a corporate trajectory. And it was the weirdest two choices. It was all through networking. And I had an opportunity to be a marketing assistant at Titan Sports. They were the ones that, run the WWE Wrestling Federation.
Okay.
Crazy.
Sounds interesting.
Crazy. Yeah, I was definitely not into pro wrestling, but my boyfriend at the time was. So they were they were really surprised as an ex-classical actress could, spout the names of these wrestlers. But at the same token, I got an opportunity to interview for a junior analyst position at Lehman Brothers. That was in a high-end investment bank before the market crashed in 2008. They, really one of the top notch. And I had taken a couple of night classes with a professor who realized that I was very, very analytical. I don't know if I thought I was very analytical. I was just the only one awake in his class, to be honest. But
sometimes it's all it takes.
Going back to my physics and calculus time in college, I was always very curious. And it brings me back to something that I tell people all the time. Be careful how you define yourself, even if it's leaning into your strengths. Because now I realize in hindsight, yes, and he saw it, I was very, very analytical, very quantitative, in a very creative kind of way. But I grew up with a twin brother he was the math science guy. Okay. So by definition, I did complementary angle. And I said, well, I'm the social studies English person. Okay. And so I had sort of blocked myself out of how I defined myself at the time up until this point. So I didn't see math science as a real strength of mine. I just thought it was a curiosity. And so I blew everybody's mind, went up through the whole interview chain at Lehman Brothers, and they ended up offering me the job. And I'll never forget the head of the division. It was supposed to be a 15-minute interview. Yeah. And it was supposed to be just checks the box. And he's just like, you're obviously getting the job because everybody is just a fan of yours, but help me understand why you're sitting across from me. I mean, we've got MBAs that we interviewed, economics, 3 people. He's like, obviously I'm going to hire you, but I just
don't
curious.
Know why.
And I don't know exactly. And we got along. He was that guy that asked you all the questions on the interview you're not supposed to ask. And so we actually just had this wonderful riff. And I just pulled this answer out of nowhere. And I said, you know what? At the end of the day, when you're an artist, whether you're an actor or a musician or anything, you do whatever it takes behind the scenes to prepare yourself so that when you go on stage, you are excellent, because everything is at risk. You either soar or you sink. There's very little in between. And I go, so if you want somebody coming in with a certain amount of knowledge, I'm not your person. If you want somebody coming in with a desire to be excellent and to act and want to do a work ethic that will get you there, then I am the right person. Sure. And he goes, okay, well, now you're really hired. But so then I went back, I was soaring, but I went back and I thought, okay, well, I've got this job, the marketing assistant job, with everything that I had done behind myself as my expertise. Yeah. It was writing, it was interpersonal, it was all of my strengths. And then there was this job that I was going to be in spreadsheets all day. And I was going to be, the words were terrifying to me. I used to look at the financial pages of newspapers and just shut down. I was like,
no, thanks.
It was like something out of the Matrix. And it was such the beginning of my career. And I don't know what came over me. And I said, well, I already do this well. I already know this is my essence. This is my opportunity. Somehow they saw something in me that they're willing to offer me the job, which I still couldn't believe that somehow they had seen that in me. And I just took this bold move. I did the opposite of what I thought my strengths were, that I thought would sort of balance out my portfolio, because I said, if I build up a competency here and then I infuse it with what I already know I'm good at or I'm comfortable doing, I'll just be that much better. Right. And I'm so grateful that I did that, because what I realized is I wasn't just developing something that I saw as a weakness. It actually was an unrecognized strength. And it was really, and so all of us come with stories about when we grow up because of the way our family, if we have multiple kids, somebody's a sports kid, somebody's a musician, we all take positions in our lives that both open us up to possibility, but sometimes at the same time limit who we think we can be. And I just want to tell everyone, just challenge them. You don't have to be good at everything, but also challenge the assumptions you've told yourself, because they are not universal truths. You didn't come out of the womb and somebody said, thou shalt not. And, and then that's off the table. Now, of course, there are things that we're all naturally good at. And just, I know for me, I have friends who are really good at the administrative details. They love being in all that and keeping, the same thing every day. They're great at that. I'd lose my mind. Right. So that's my wiring, but that's different than my competency. So it's good to know both. It's good to know what are the things that you're really good at, and the things you're afraid at that you potentially actually could be quite good at. And the things that no matter how you tried, it's just, you'd never feel comfortable. You'd never be in your zone doing it.
Right.
So, the funny thing about my career is I feel like it's been defined by me throwing myself into the deep end of the pool.
Love that. Bold moves over and over.
I mean, it was almost like a compulsion. I'm like, what is wrong with me? So fast forward, I was running global compensation at Deutsche Bank about 20 years ago, multi-billion-dollar bonus pools back in Excel when there weren't systems or connectivity or anything. And I remember joking with the global head of derivatives structuring and trading. And this was like 20 years ago. And I said, you need some diversity on the trading floor. And he's like, yeah, woman. And I go, actually, what I meant is diversity of thought. Because what they were doing, I had to know a lot about their business in order to structure the right types of sales and different types of compensation programs. And I realized the types of products they were developing were actually there to hedge and offset the stock option dilution, which was the products I was creating as the compensation expert. So I said, yes, the fact that you actually had a woman on the floor other than somebody to get coffee would be transformational. But actually what I'm thinking about is diversity in thought. And it was because we were working there till 11 o'clock at night on a deal. I had nothing to lose. I was half joking. Yeah. And I left it, but I planted the seed unbeknownst to me. I get a call 6 months later. And they're like, so if you're serious, if you're willing to bury your vice president title, we'll give you a shot on the trading floor as long as you don't mind being the junior schlub. Somebody just left.
Okay.
And I was like, okay, once again, these are people with PhDs in economics and Harvard MBAs. And I get on there and I'm like, okay, I'll take a shot. I had nothing to lose. My mortgage was paid off. And I surprised everyone, even though I didn't have the traditional background. And I went onto a structuring derivatives desk.
Interesting.
And I thought I knew stock options from the work I had done in compensation. I knew nothing, Jon Snow. I mean, I thought I knew nothing. And so I joke all the time. So everybody else is sitting around me with these Harvard and MIT MBAs. And so I didn't have any of that classic education. So what I did was Wednesdays was my school night. And on this big trading floor, I found out all the things these mostly guys learned in their MBA program. And I had like titles and I bought the books and I read the chapters, and whatever I couldn't understand, I found the smartest guy on the trading floor that knew that chapter. And I said, we're going to the bar, and either I understand this chapter or you're falling off the stool drunk, but I'm basically buying you beer until I understand this material. And people, they thought it was really funny. So people would sign up and, 3 months out, when you get to binomial valuation, when you get to this corporate finance, whatever, debt restructure, whatever it was. And the nice thing about it is it was a very practical way to learn this material.
Yeah.
It was a great way in a sea of men. And I've always been very comfortable like hanging with men. I had a twin brother and was very sort of a jock, but it was a way to create relationships in a very substantive and yet humorous way. So they didn't have to treat me precious, and that I couldn't roll with them, but in a real substantive way. I ended up enrolling a lot of people in my success on the trading floor, because they were there to help me learn. So it's really great when you have that many people sort of cheering for you. But what was interesting, after I learned it, I realized I was actually pretty bored, because once you learn it and you get through the technical language, it's really very similar day after day. And so about 2 or 3 years in, I got a call from the recruiter who had placed me at Lehman Brothers. And she told me about another job. She goes, at Merrill Lynch at the time, it was their international division. They were bleeding money, tens of millions of dollars, and they were bringing in a turnaround team. And it was very complicated. It was very global. And she goes, nobody wants the job. It's perfect for you. Go, what?
Thanks. Sign me up.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, Diane, why would I take this job? I'm swinging it with the boys.
Yeah.
I'm on a trading floor. Like, why would my ego was so proud, understandably. And it's funny, she was one of those recruiters that really understood the human. Not all recruiters are like this. They just match resumes. But she really understood how I was wired. And she goes, let me guess, at this point, you're kind of bored. You're acting like the chief operating officer of the floor, probably process improving and helping people think about the next generation, but they're not paying you for it. And your ego's happy, but your work ethic or your work mind isn't challenged. And I went home because I was like, how do I go from a trading floor into HR? Like, how do I my ego explain that to people? And I went home and I was just like, damn it, she's right. like really? So I ended up leaving the trading floor and burying my ego and really went after the work that inspired me and enlightened me. I mean, part of it was also the team that they had constructed was, to this day, some of the best people I've ever worked with. And so like that classic, when you want to play tennis with someone better than yourself, this was a room full of people like that. So that was really, really amazing. So, I tend to always go into environments that there's a lot of change going on, because then the status quo is challenged. And I can sort of say, well, it's not me challenging it, it's the environment. So it helps accelerates the initiatives, whether it's innovation or more transformation that I tend to work on. But it was interesting, after 25 years in corporate, I took a slight detour a couple of years ago into startup tech. I'd had some health challenges. I got very bad advanced Lyme disease. And when I was coming back from that, I needed a little more flexibility. So I ended up being a COO of a startup tech company, high in machine vision, AI, in the municipal space.
Where are you located? Because I know you were at Northwestern, so Chicago. And so then I know you're in New York now.
Yeah, my whole career was in New York.
Okay.
Although when I was on Wall Street, I traveled a ton. So
Okay.
it was really New York and London. Although I never lived in London, I spent a ton of time in London.
Okay.
Actually interesting. Well, when I went to that job at Merrill, it was right before 9/11. So I was
Oh, wow.
in London. My last known job before Merrill was in the Financial Trade Center.
Mm-hmm.
We were in the Financial Center. I was in London with my London team, meeting them for the first time on a conference call with my New York team when the
Wow.
planes hit.
Wow.
And so luckily everybody got out, but it was very odd because they kept me in London for over a month to run things because everything was decimated in New York, as you can imagine.
Yeah. Wow.
So to see that all from a international perspective, very, very different. But yeah, so, interesting, weird, nooks and crannies of my career.
Sure.
A lot of it was just about what was the challenge ahead of me, what was the thing that needed to be thought through and, sort of transformed. But after 25 years, people had been telling me, why don't you have your own shop? Why don't you have your own shop?
Yeah.
And I think I had done, so when my Lyme hit about 7 or 8 years ago, I really had to dig deep. I really got very ill, had to step out of the workforce for 2 years. And I really had to think about what are those things that drive me? What of all the crazy jobs that I've had throughout my career, like what is the through line? What is that essence of what makes me the happiest and I create the biggest value?
Love that.
And whether it was when I was in,
I want to backtrack a little bit. You said this was 7 years ago and Lyme disease?
Yeah, very bad Lyme disease. So it affected my respiratory system primarily. So chronic bronchitis, massive fatigue. Just absolute my endocrine system. So I went from working probably 80 to 100 hours a week. I was the global head of human capital strategy, analytics, and rewards for Marsh McLennan. Is a 55,000 person around the globe, 100 company type of company. I was, classically on the outside at the top of my game. Once again, going back to the acknowledgement of ego, my ego was really satisfied because I had this big job, this big office, this big title, this big compensation. But if I really look back, my adrenal fatigue was extensive.
Sure.
I was just so off course to truly understand where my value is and what drives me. And then while I was on disability, we had a new CEO come in. And as many CEOs do, they want their own executive team. So I got laid off while I was on disability.
Wow.
So I was too sick to really interview at the time. And then, filed for divorce after 20 years with my ex. And I call it my trinity of trauma. And I remember laying in my bed, looking at the ceiling and acutely knowing that all of the skills that had made me wildly successful, all that very masculine alpha energy, what I defined as resilience, but was like sort of aggressive resilience, were going to bury me. And I had this amazing, at the time, 7-year-old daughter. And I just realized that I just was completely ill prepared to rebuild my life for what I had, with the tools that I had in my tool chest. So I became a seeker. I really read a ton of different types of tomes, from Wayne Dyer, Brene Brown, the list goes on and on. I had he was an ex-retired tech CEO that had really recommended me to go to Landmark. Don't love their sales technique, but their technology, their framework of transformational education is really pretty profound. And that was life-changing for me. A couple of years ago, I actually got certified with one of the top coaching schools. And this was before I even knew I was going to start my own company, because that was that personal inquisition. What is that thing that I love and that I create the biggest impact with? And whether it was when I was acting or on the trading floor or as a COO or an executive, every single time I was in my zone when I was helping unlock potential, either individually or as a team, in a team or organizationally, Like I was at my highest self in service of, I was using all of my capabilities, my left brain, my right brain. And I could see I could create this performance and potential and fulfillment in a way that I think most people before didn't think were possible.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a pretty fun kind of person. So even though I'm incredibly intense, I'm really intense. The fun part really helps people have fun as they're scared out of their wits, looking to get to that other side and realize they've got someone, it's okay to fail, right? I mean, when you talk about bold moves, you have to be prepared to fall on your face.
Oh, totally.
Yeah, and gloriously.
Or it wouldn't be bold.
Right. I mean, and gloriously. And obviously there's certain consequences to those failures that you have to be careful on, but you have to celebrate the failure sometimes as much, if not more so, than the successes, because you're going for it. It's like when I see actors and musicians, and the worst thing I can see is mediocre.
Right.
Because they're dialing it in. Right? They're kind of playing it safe. Like I either want amazing or I almost want awful. Not awful in skill, but they haven't found it. They haven't got it yet, but they're trying. You can see they're searching and reaching. And I think with, your own development or your company, or if it's your own personal quest, I've tried different modalities and stuff, and it just hasn't worked. I've spent money on classes that it was like, but if I get something out of it. I mean, you always get something out of it.
Right.
Because defining
if you're looking, right.
Yeah. And defining it's almost like dating, right? You start dating and you realize, I don't want that type.
I figured out what I don't want. Yeah.
Yeah. You start narrowing the gap. Right. And that's why it's as much as important to understand that dynamic, not just on the what, but the how. I mean, one of the things I talk to people about all the time is people spend so much time on what they want to accomplish, they forget to really think about how do they want their life to look, like the qualities, the values, the texture of their life. Because you could have 2 job offers, and if you don't have those values really articulated, more times than not, your ego will take over. You'll go for the money, you'll go for your ego. But if you, like, for example, if you really thought, I want to be self-expressed, and I want flexibility, and I want innovation. And you get 2 job offers, right? And you think about the leader that you're going to work with, and the job nature and the compensation.
Uh-oh, we're frozen.
So, one thing that's really important for folks to think about. So let's take an example where you've got 2 job offers. If you haven't really taken the time to think about what kind of life you want to manifest, what are those qualities that are important to you? Let's give an example of someone wants to be self-expressed and innovative and maybe collaborative or, flexible. We all talk about flexible, although now that we're all remote, flexible means going out versus coming back. But let's say and that's just an example, right? It could be a myriad of things. And you have 2 different job offers. Your natural tendency your ego will pull you to the title and the compensation, right? Which may not be the things that will make you fulfilled and into your best, most inspired self. And oftentimes those qualities have a lot to do with the quality of the person you're working for. Tons of research that shows why people stay or leave organizations is the fit with your manager, right? So for me, it's all one thing to spout it. It's another thing to live it. And I go back to this all the time. Was it the right decision? But about 2 years ago, right before I launched, I got a call for huge job in New York City. And it was back to where I'd been, the title and the office and the whole compensation, the whole thing. So, unfortunately, he was a pretty old-fashioned CEO, which is interesting because most of the C-suite was always traveling around the world to clients, but he had this notion that senior team needed to be in, 7 o'clock in the morning till 7, 8 o'clock at night, 5 days a week.
Okay.
And that was just not anywhere close to the values that I had listed, being there for my daughter, top stack of the list. And it doesn't mean
especially after your health.
Yeah, my health and divorce, but I knew that my biggest gift, or the thing that I'm here on this planet to do, is steward her development. And it's that I couldn't do that in that kind of environment. Doesn't mean I couldn't be in an executive position, doesn't mean, but that job, yeah, and they were not willing to budge. So they just kept throwing more and more money at me.
Yeah.
Because they couldn't believe that I'd say no. I mean, this was a marquee job that so many people were going for, and I just kept saying no. So yeah, I mean, they did what traditional companies do if they think they can woo you, and they just kept throwing, bigger offers, more money into the package. And, I just kept saying no, which blew their minds, because this was a marquee job that many people wanted. And to be frank, even if at that point they had said, sure, we'll flex on the hours, I don't think I would have believed it. I think it was a little too late, not that they ever got there. And so I walked away. And that really, put me to the test of, what do I believe? What do I stand for in my life?
Yeah.
And, I have to admit, after turning her down, I felt pretty good. I mean, a little traumatized, I'll be honest, but I knew it was aligned to the life I wanted to build. And I said, the thing I had to challenge was my notion that the only way to make that kind of money was in that kind of paradigm. And I had to get really centered, especially I was launching. I'd never had my own company before, to say, you know what, I hold as more than possible, that not only can I make that much money, but more, but on my terms.
Love that.
And so, yeah, so that is, probably the boldest move I've ever done, was to bet on myself after, the safety of a corporate job for 25 plus years. And I did very differently than I usually do, which is I usually am a real planner, strategic planner. I do a lot of strategy. So I knew that if I were going to have the courage to do this, I had to lean away from my need to have all the answers. And so I basically had a hypothesis, not all the answers of what my company was going to do. I had the domain, I had the name, I had a logo, and I launched. And it's one of those things I talk a lot to my women clients about some of the things that I think hold women back in their careers, is many times this unfortunate notion that knowing is your value. And so actually it's your ability to grow, your learning agility, which is the power for you to step forward way out of your comfort zone. And your confidence really should be rooted in your ability to learn and to grow, not in what you know.
Ooh, I like
and
that a lot.
So I had to once again eat my own cooking on that one. And I declared the biggest future I could. And I said, okay. And I've been learning. Once again, some things failing, some things wildly succeeding. My first year out economically was actually a good success from a numbers perspective. But I also knew that there were things I wasn't doing to really optimize my business in a way that I know I would have advised any other client of mine. And so what's interesting is when it's your own company. Before, I was wildly confident and pretty alpha in my business side of my personality, and not so much in my personal side, to be completely vulnerable and honest. You fuse those. Now your business is your personality. And I realized some of those inner gremlin messages, I'm not good enough, can I do this, were infiltrating and undermining my ability to really be as powerful in my business as I could. And once again, economically it was going well, but I could just feel I wasn't really leaning into the biggest, boldest version of myself in my company. So the awesome part about this, as difficult as it was, is I finally had to tackle those inner messages that weren't serving me personally and now professionally, and really get a handle on it, because I knew failing was not an option. Just not going to happen.
Right.
So it provided me with this opportunity. And was it comfortable? No. But it was necessary. And the funny part about this, the unintended consequence, because I ended up really finally tackling these messages that I've been carrying around that really hadn't served me, because I had the motivation professionally. Now I am in this wonderful relationship that is a truly evolved relationship, because I think I've finally flushed all of that other stuff out of my system and said, yeah, no, I know what I deserve. I know what I'm capable of. And it's funny, it was sort of this byproduct. But yeah, sometimes your boldest move is looking at those things that really aren't serving you anymore and saying, yeah, I recognize that the narrative maybe was there to protect me, but I
Right.
don't need that protection anymore. And I
Yeah.
choose to kind of give it a timeout, put it somewhere else, and come from a place of play to say, what would better serve me now? And it's iterative. It's not like you do the process once and then woof, you're better.
Yeah.
But it's, if you repeat it time after time, when you catch yourself, you really end up living your most authentic, vibrant self.
That's beautiful. So I've heard you say a couple of things that have sort of alluded to potentially your purpose, because I always like to ask people that. And I know it's something that's dynamic, and especially since you mentioned that your career has been serpentine, and sometimes people's purpose and career are the same, but you've mentioned, raising your daughter. What is your purpose as you define it right now?
Well, I think it really is the essence of my company now and why we call it Vibrant Ventures, because it's really about, working with high performing professionals and people to completely unlock their potential
Mm-hmm.
in a way that is fulfilling, aligned to the life they want to create. It doesn't need to be mutually exclusive, that you can have a really successful, high performing career and
Mm-hmm.
a vibrant life on the
Mm-hmm.
personal side as well. And this first fits perfectly into my mother narrative, because I don't think of myself as just, okay, I'm here to, cook and clean and make sure my
Sure.
daughter's schoolwork is done. It's the same thing. Like, what tools do I have to unlock and work with her to unlock her most fulfilled and highest potential self? Now, I'm really lucky. I've got like this awesome kid.
Yeah.
So, I got a lot to work with, which is great. And she actually schools me oftentimes. She's like my little life coach from heaven. I
That's
shouldn't say
awesome.
little anymore, because she's actually taller than I am now. But yes. But that's really my life purpose. And, that's the essence of the company. How that manifests and how that fulfills is always evolving on
Sure.
the services that we provide our clients. We have a consulting arm and we have a coaching arm of the company. But
Okay.
that's really the essence of what we do, whether it's on the business side or the personal development side.
Okay, fantastic. Now, this may have been also something that you mentioned in telling your story, and I know turning down that job offer, or, being sick in bed and dealing with your, what did you call it, a trio of
Yeah,
tragedy?
Trinity of trauma. That's
Trinity of
good too.
trauma. I was close.
You were
Uh,
very close. Very good.
but I would love to know, like, what your scariest moment that you've been through was. And it obviously could be something you haven't mentioned yet, but I always like to hear about when people are pushing past fear to go after
Yeah.
whatever it
I
is.
mean, I'd say two things. I think it's that it was really sitting in that room, after those three things.
Yeah.
I'd say two. I've actually had two trinities of trauma. I had a trinity of trauma when I was 20.
Mhm.
Ironically, they all happened within 9 months. My twin brother passed away unexpectedly.
I'm sorry to
My
hear that.
mom had a mental break, and I was the victim of that. And I was the victim of a violent #MeToo incident.
Mm.
And so all of those three things were so intense that's really what forged this very alpha masculine energy
Mhm.
personality in me, that once again, like I said, for 20 plus years served as purpose on an outside perspective, made me very externally successful, but the
Sure.
inside was completely empty. And then it was my second trinity of trauma that was very different, that forced me to go inward, with an introspection that I had to build up, some real resiliency on the inside. And both, were blessings. I say all the time that my Lyme disease was one of the best things that ever happened to me.
Yeah.
And it was really tough. I can't underestimate how hard that period was and what it did to
Mhm.
my health. But like, I don't know if I would have I probably wouldn't have had the courage to make the bold move, because I would have been tone deaf that there was anything else possible. Right.
Sure.
And so it was a gift to me to see another path, another type of possibility.
Mhm.
Um, and, I'd say the second thing that I'm dealing with now, listen, we're right in the middle in New York of the coronavirus. It hasn't even gotten at its worst. I have, friends, I know people who have passed. I have friends on ventilators. I have respiratory issues from my Lyme disease.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a daily practice to not succumb to the fear.
Sure.
It is. It has to be, because it's on the media. We're experiencing a communal sense of grief, a
Right.
grief of, the way it used to be, that it probably will never be the same again. Communal loss. A lot of people, I don't know, in New York, we're finding everybody's got someone who has, very, very sick or have passed from this. And so thank God I have the tools, skills that I've developed over the last 7 or 8 years, because I don't know what I've pulled from, and I'm not successful. I'll be honest, in pure vulnerability, I'm not as successful every day.
Right.
There are some days I'm very good with my meditation practice to reset my energy. There are days that I'm better with the self-care. And other days not. And I think one of the things I tell a lot of my clients right now, it's okay.
Right.
It's okay to honor the downside, the dark side, right? Because if what you resist persists, and if you keep trying to say, I shouldn't be feeling this way, it'll actually make it worse.
Right.
Of course we should all be feeling this way.
Yeah.
Of course, but they don't need to be mutually exclusive. So, you can feel sad and grieving while still having a cadence of gratitude and compassion for others and oneself. And so I think, one of those things I'm talking about often is just this: they don't need to be mutually exclusive. You don't have to deny the intensity of what's going on and then still supplement it so that you have sort of this balanced portfolio of energy.
I like how you worded
absolutely.
That. Very cool. So I feel like, especially since you do life coaching, and you've kind of already given this in your response, but I always like to give people tips, or have my guests give people tips of how to push past fear. And I think, what you've said about that balanced portfolio of energy, it makes so much sense. And every time that I've ever not acknowledged anything that's bothering me, it always just boils over at the worst possible moment, instead of just being
absolutely.
like, okay, I'm at home, I can cry in the shower for a little bit, or I can discuss this with whoever it involves, and that makes a huge difference. But when it's fear, it's a little bit different. And I like how you described, it's protective. And then once you realize that and can acknowledge it and say like, hey, I don't really need that protection, thank you.
Yeah.
You can move
and then
forward.
I love how you said it's because you question, what is this fear meant to protect me from?
Right.
And then the next, question is it serving me? Because with certain fear, you don't want your kids running into the street. So that fear is reasonable, right?
Yeah.
So all the time I'm saying it's not so much that things are good and bad, is that do they serve you?
Right.
So it's sort of this series of whys, or is it serving you? If so, why? If so, why? If so, why? And really get at the essence of, and what are you prepared to let go of?
I'm so glad that you worded it that way. Go ahead.
Yeah, let go. I'm prepared now to let go. And then to the extent it's not always immediate, but if you come from a place of play or more curiosity, what could fill in the blank? Because when there's sort of absence of space, the natural tendency is to then fill it back with what you're used to, is to say, what else could that be? Oftentimes, even if it's uncomfortable, is gratitude, right? For the smallest things. It seems almost silly in this time, where everybody's on lockdown, but there's so many things to be grateful for, right? That your network, I'm so grateful for social media that we can, even though it can be toxic, it can be really a connection.
Sure.
I am absolutely ODing on the hilarious memes, coronavirus memes.
Yes.
And I'm using humor times 10 to help raise the energy.
Yeah.
Just the animal videos alone, I think, are getting me through this.
Yes.
But these little things, the fact that you are safe at home, the fact that whatever it is, that we do have food, even if it's not the food you want, there is food in the refrigerator.
Right.
These little things, and sometimes when you're feeling least able to feel grateful, it's just, you just find little things. It doesn't have to be this big thing. sometimes just feeling grateful for feeling feelings.
Yeah.
Feeling the feel. I'm grateful that there is fear for me to feel, which means it's there somehow to serve me. I don't know how yet, or I don't know why. And it just shifts the energy, which is really where the largest transformation happens. It's not necessarily big things, but perspective shifts that really unlock a lot of happiness and fulfillment.
Yeah, I love that. Like I've seen a few different memes too, where it says like, instead of thinking I'm stuck at home, think I'm safe at home. And I think that just a tiny little change can really make a difference in how you view things. And I think that's everything.
And you know what? It's okay if you catch yourself, it's like you do something and then you catch yourself and you're like, okay, let me reframe it. And I talk to my clients a lot about it's like training, right? So they do something and then they realize a week later, I was being a toxic thinking cycle. And then they get it to a day, they realize, and then it's an hour, they realize. And then, they're in moment and they're catching themselves. And I go, that's success.
Right. Celebrate catching yourself. Yeah.
And even if it's a week later, a day later, because you're becoming self-aware. I mean, really, there's so much richness is taking your subconscious tendencies and putting light on it. And then deciding, does it serve you? So even if you're catching yourself doing something that you wish you didn't do, that is actually something to tremendously celebrate, because it means you're finally shining light into these different nooks and crannies, and you have now the power to decide whether it's serving you or not.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Now, I know that I've noticed in your story, there's been a huge thread of curiosity and exploration from when you were in college and taking classes unrelated to your major to your taking experts out for a beer and learning. And of course, now that most of us are in quarantine or shelter in place, we have a little more time to do self-study or reading. So I'm curious what book recommendations you have, and it can be any genre, fiction, nonfiction, just anything that people might be interested. If they like your story, they might want to read what you're reading.
Sure. What was really transformational for me, in particular, if you think about that first trinity of trauma, when I was really alpha and really kind of that, tough shell, to the person I am now is Brené Brown's Daring Greatly.
Okay.
And her work on vulnerability.
Sure.
And how that is truly a source of power, and not something to run away from or be disgusted by, but really something to embrace. How I like to describe it is before, it's almost like, BC AD, of my life.
Yeah.
But before I embraced my vulnerability, how I used to like to describe it is I had very high walls around me to protect myself from people, but almost no boundaries. So if somebody leapfrogged over that wall and they got in, I could get walked over all day long.
Okay.
Now I spend a lot of time to take down that wall and really embrace my vulnerability, but I have very clear boundaries. And I can feel when my tendency to put my wall back, up and get protected. And I really do those exercises to keep it down and say, what boundaries have I not articulated or am I not honoring? Because then you really can be your most vulnerable and I think powerful self, while still making sure that your needs are being taken care of and respected.
That's fantastic advice. And I'm so glad that Brené Brown is having such a good moment finally, with the Netflix
absolutely.
and all of that. So very cool.
Yeah, she's really an amazing spirit. I'm trying to think, it's funny because my company's name is Vibrant Ventures and it's spelt a little weird. It's VYBRANTE. It's not because we're bad spellers. It's because our premise is in order to unlock individual, team, and organizational vibrancy, you have to understand your why. And in the end, it's about your E factor or your energy. It's that mindset.
Yeah.
And so interestingly enough, he kind of got there first, but I will give it to him. Simon Sinek has this book, Start With Why.
Start With Why, yeah. The
yeah,
TED
and
Talk
I hadn't
too.
read it. Yeah, and I'd seen the TED Talk. I hadn't read the book actually. But he has a book club now. So there's a bunch of us who, it's actually starting this Friday. It's free. I think it's like 6 weeks. And it's on his YouTube channel. And so there's a group of us that, even have we read it or not read it, we're rereading it and then talking about it first. And then you can submit questions to him and then he'll sort of live discuss the various sections of the book.
Cool.
So I'm doing that now because it is really one of the essence of my company is this concept of why.
Mm-hmm.
And that works, by the way, just as much for teams and corporations as it does for individuals.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree. Great recommendations. Thank you.
Oh, my
I
pleasure.
always also like to ask people, I think just organically in our conversation, you've given a lot of great tips, and I think there's a lot people can glean from what you said. But if there's any other messages on your heart, lessons you've learned recently, or any other just wisdom you want to share with our viewers or listeners, I'd love to give you the opportunity to let that out.
Well, it's funny. You pointed out a word that is something that I think got anchored into when I started my company. And it's a mantra I came up with to really get me comfortable with the whole business development side of things. It wasn't my background. I was sort of the internal nerd, smart person, not the external. And I had to say, how am I going to do this with my authenticity? And it kind of worked for my dating too. When I started dating again, is exploration, not expectation.
Ooh, I like that.
And what I mean that when you go into a conversation, any kind of interaction, if you only have a very limited definition in your heart and in your brain of what success looks like, you're going to feel disappointed often. And also you're going to limit all of these other wonderful possibilities about what can be possible in that interaction. Like if your intention is so narrow, you just never get to explore. And I know even in my own business, I think one of the reasons why the first year went so well is exactly because of that. I met a ton of people. It wasn't, of course, I was looking to business development, and I'm always looking to kind of get better at that. It's a new skill for me, but because I came from this place of exploration to understand what their needs were, to understand who they were. There's a lot of times where maybe that person wasn't a good fit, or they didn't need my services, but they felt seen, they felt heard, they understood who I was, and they had, in relatively small amount of time, no problem making a referral. And usually that takes a long time to develop, that sort of referral, cascade. So, and like I said, even personally, certainly dating, I joke all the time when I was on online dating, it's either a great date or a great story.
Yeah.
Like I could do a comedy routine, and actually it's not even about the women's stories. I always ask the guys their worst online dating story, which always adds just so much levity. And I could just do an entire Netflix comedy routine on the stories these guys have told me.
I'm sure.
So you know what, you just go in, you explore, you meet people, you figure out what are their needs, what are their hopes, what are their dreams, and is there any way me and my company can help move that forward? And if not, I've made friends through this process as well. So really fun.
That's awesome. I think there have been so many things where it's been like almost like a tagline you've said that I'm sure you say all the time. And I'm like, oh, I love that. Like the growth, agility, and exploration, not expectation. Because I think we probably have a lot in common. And I don't know, like I want to ask, like, are you a Virgo too? Because I feel
an Aquarius. An Aquarius.
Okay. Because I feel like so much of what you say, I'm like, yep, that's me. And I'm like, I could definitely use to do like more exploration and play instead of, having such a rigid mindset about so many things. So I really appreciate
but you know
that.
what? And then, I'm sure in many ways that really served you well. Like I know my ability to do that sort of calculus, or that, I knew all different possibilities and be prepared for it, was one of my real strengths.
Right.
But, it can also backfire. One of the best exercises I've ever done, and I do with my clients, is I ask them what are their 3 strengths.
Yeah.
And everybody gets kind of peacocky, and they get, kind of, and then I go, and where is that not serving you? So perfect example, when I did this, is one of the things I was really proud of is I'm incredibly independent. I was the breadwinner, prior. I'm like, always done it all on my own. And the question was, but do you have a problem depending on people? And I was like, yeah. And to have a fulfilled life, don't you need to depend on someone? I'm like,
right.
Yeah. Like I was very attached to being really smart, not to sound like, but that was my ego. That was my safe space. And it's like, well, what is not possible if you're so defined? Like it would have felt disintegrous to myself if I were heart-centered or intuition-centered.
Right.
But for me to really have quantum living and quantum decision making, like my best decisions when I'm listening to my gut and my heart and my head. And so to honor your strengths, but once again, are they fully serving you in all instances? And if not, you have an infinite number of choices at your disposal.
I love that. I think that's really great advice. So if somebody is listening and would love what you have to offer, or even just whatever you're putting out on social media or online, where can you be found, both personally and if you're willing to share, or of course professionally?
Absolutely. So my website, that's a really, sounds like I'm a New Yorkie here, right?
Yeah,
so,
they got an accent suddenly.
With a little New York, yes. My website is it's got a lot of great free resources for folks. It's actually got videos explaining different types of energy frameworks and downloadables. So highly recommend going there as a start. So that's www.vybrante.com. So vibrant.com.
Okay.
On LinkedIn, it's Kerrian Fournier. I know my name is spelled in it, but it's Kerrian. Little funky spelling there, kind of Irishy. And Fournier, Fournier. Like all my social media posts, everything. I write a lot. I'm a featured writer for Thrive Global. I do different types of, content work for different news outlets and different things like that. So I tend to try and put my voice that way as well. Okay. And if anybody wants to, just reach out, I do complimentary sessions, particularly now, by the way, that we are all going through so much.
Sure.
Sometimes just having like a laser coaching session for 15 minutes to help do that mindset shift. Totally open to that. So feel free to email me at Kerrian, Kerrian @Vibrant, VYBRANTE.com. Send me an email. We can set something up, and we'll all get through this together.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that. I'll make sure all of that and your book recommendations are all in the show notes. My final question I love to ask, even before I had a podcast, this was a fun one. And since you've had such a windy road, I think it'll be fun for you to answer as well. But if 8-year-old Kerrian had a crystal ball and could see this whole journey, and now we have pretty uncertain times, but the foreseeable future, hopefully we can have like travel plans and other things coming up, or creativity with what we have to work with to do cool things still. But on a scale of 1 to 11, how excited would little Kerrian be to see where you are now?
I think it should be like 15.
Nice.
I mean, just like, I think, I think it would be, wow. Like I think kids want to have fun, right? And so I think from an adult perspective, my 8-year-old self was like, yeah, it doesn't matter this title, that title. I think she'd see that I was having a lot of fun in my life.
Yeah.
And just really enjoying the ride. And that's why I think an 8-year-old self is a good barometer to say, are you on the right track?
Yeah, I totally agree. It's so funny because whenever people have kind of asked me that back, I've joked like, well, I don't have a dog. And I feel like 8-year-old me would be really disappointed. And now you've probably heard my foster puppy like deeply sighing or walking around. I don't know what his deep sighs are all about, but he does it. And he's sort of close to the microphone.
I think he's so happy to just be in a loving home. I don't blame him for doing deep sighs.
He's so cute. Well, thank you so much for what you're doing in the world. I know that I personally, just listening to you, have gotten so much out of this. So I'm sure our listeners and viewers will feel the same way. I really appreciate you taking the time. And thank you so much.
My absolute pleasure. This was fun.
I really hope you enjoyed our conversation. If you're looking for the book recommendations or to find her online, you can go to the show notes at boldmovespodcast.com. I would love it if you subscribed, shared this episode, and left lovely reviews on Apple Podcasts. And as always, be bold and have a sparkly day. Bye-bye.